Well, welcome everyone. This is the November 2023 edition of our Data Science Group webinar series led by the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub. Today we have three guest speakers that have a variety of science teaching experiences with different roles in different organizations and with different audiences. But first, I'd like to make a quick introduction to the series. My name is JD Graham, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Specialist for the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub. We are a regional organization funded by the National Science Foundation, working with a 12-state area of the Midwest of the US. But we're also part of a national network of 4 hubs founded in 2015 to be a catalyst for bringing together different groups of people spanning the country who are focused on data science and data-related activities across academia, industry, government, and nonprofits, helping to build collaborations and partnerships between sectors. So as a part of this webinar series, we bring together university science students, student leaders from official RSAs, as well as informal organizations to share best practices, their experiences in developing programmatic activities, and different ways of building local communities. Additionally, we recruit speakers to talk on a variety of subjects graduate and undergraduate students care about. Our goal is to learn from each other and to help build a network of student leaders across our region. The Hub has this webinar series, a Slack community, and profiles of student groups on our website. We encourage you to join our future webinars, to reach out to us if you'd like to participate with your group, either in a webinar or a profile series. Our future webinars will include topics like student data science leaders and conversations more like this one. We'll be talking about field versus bench or screen work, managing stress and anxiety in higher education, and helping international students navigate American universities. Now, I want to turn it over to our guests. I want to welcome them. I really appreciate Sally Chang, David Lockett, Tony Staubach for coming on. They have some excellent backgrounds, and I think we're going to have some excellent conversations. But first, let's start with Sally. Could you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and what is your experience in science education?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So hi, and thank you all for being here, and to JD for reaching out originally. This was an awesome invitation to get, very flattering. Thank you. But yeah, so my name is Sally Chang, she, her pronouns, and my background is in biology. So I got an undergrad degree in just basic, what you would call just normal biology at Swarthmore College, which is outside of Philadelphia. And by the end of that degree, I realized that I wanted to somehow combine my interests in basically marine biology, because who doesn't love creatures from under the sea, and the statistics classes that I was taking at the time. So I started to look into graduate programs that would allow me to do essentially like data heavy projects on organisms that are in the ocean. So you can probably imagine that, especially at the time, that was about 10 years ago, there weren't perhaps too many of those programs, but after a quick Google, I was able to reach out to the person who ended up becoming my master's and PhD advisor, Dr. Pauline Cartwright at the University of Kansas. And my PhD research was on jellyfish and their relatives, and specifically how changes in the genes they're expressing and the size and content of their genomes corresponds to changes in like what habitats they can, take advantage of. And I actually studied some weird, freaky jellyfish that are actually parasites of fish living in the Midwest. Feel free to ask me more about that now or later. But in any case, that was sort of because I was working with genomic data at a time when all of that sort of next-gen sequencing, truly gigantic genomic data sets were coming out. I basically, no one else in my department knew how to do it at the time. My advisor basically said, okay, here's a giant pile of data that literally destroys Excel if you open it. So I had to, with a few other graduate students, get together and work on how do we best teach ourselves the skills like command line and R and other statistics things that you need to plow through and make some sense out of your data. And I was lucky enough to get to pass that on to undergrads as a PhD student teaching, TAing for, and then ultimately getting to, teach semesters of biostatistics and evolutionary biology. And I transitioned into a postdoc at the National Human Genome Research Institute, which is kind of funny given the organisms I was studying. But I focused there on basically developing other jellyfish into cool genetic models for things like being able to regenerate their entire bodies, sort of asking, what about their genomes and gene expression make it so that, you know, they have some similar genes to us. Basically, why can they do all those things with their tissues, but, you know, we can't at a very fundamental level? And that research is still ongoing. But about a year ago, I realized that I was interested in sort of getting out from even behind the computer, you know, a little bit more. At that point, it was pretty much a pure bioinformatics, no bench work type of postdoc, but I was like, I would like to get back to teaching those skills like I had to teach myself and other during my graduate school career. And so I was able to teach some online courses where we sort of had to pivot during the pandemic to teach, you know, in-demand bioinformatics skills to people who suddenly had to pause their research and had time to gain, you know, computational skills. And then eventually transitioned to working where I am now at the National Center for Biotechnology Information, which is an institute that's part of the NIH, part of the National Library of Medicine, lots of acronyms. But basically, it's the storehouse for all of our, most of our, you know, sort of grant funded, required to deposit biology and other types of data that are out there. So if you've ever had to, you know, retrieve a gene sequence or run a blast search for a biology class, that's us. And my job now, which I'll get into more later, is basically helping to both be a subject matter expert on comparative genomics, so teaching things related to that, basically related to my past experience, and, you know, assisting other people when they need that subject matter expertise, and then also sort of doing the logistics and overall planning for the workshop part of our education program, which is now excitingly getting to branch out into, you know, being in person and at conferences again, which I'm really excited about. So that is enough about me. I think that's enough to start, you know, questions about eventually. So I will pass it on to
we
David.
definitely will, Sally. I appreciate that. And, you know, you said three different places that you kind of grew into. And the first one with data science is something I hear, it's quite familiar, where you use it as a tool. And to do that and to do it well, it takes really self-motivation to learn how to do those things. But, you know, it sounds like both teaching and genetics themselves kind of were the same thing, where you kind of discovered them and you developed them. And I think that's good to know, and good to hear for our undergrads and graduate students that it can feel this big weight sometimes that you have to know everything you're going to do at every point and have that plan, as opposed to your plan is to do whatever you're going to do as well as possible and be open to do those things. And that's exactly what it sounds like there. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that later, and especially your teaching experience, and that those are incredibly varied. I want to give David a chance also, yes, David, please, to introduce yourself and tell me, you know, how did you get into education as well?
Thank you, JD. You know, I entered education from a different route. I'm a second generation educator. Both parents were storied educators for a number of years teaching high school courses. I graduated with a 4-year degree from Fisk University, and they said, hey, you know, why don't you consider teaching? You know, I didn't consider it, you know, it piqued my interest. So, you know, I took a traditional route and I got certified for the better part of 10 plus years. I taught STEM, I taught computer science, you know, general science and math, you know, the full elementary to middle school path. You know, and throughout those years, I did a lot of work with NASA in my classroom. Towards the end of my 10 years in the classroom, I served as an Einstein Fellow at the NASA Office of STEM Engagement. As an Einstein Fellow, we interacted with different federal partners. We designed activities for students. We learned a lot about funding and budgeting within education. It's a worthwhile experience. And that brought me to where I am currently now at the School of Applied Computational Sciences at Meharry Medical College. It's their first new school in over 100 years. They focus primarily on data science, bioinformatics, and biomedical data science as well. They focus on artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is a very hot topic right now. So a lot of our projects that we're working on now focus on AI, We've got programs that are focused in informatics and GIS as well. We received a NASA Pre-College Summer Institute grant this past summer for 5 years of funding for high school students to bring them on campus for residential camps, so they can learn, not only about, data science and biomedical data science, but, they're getting that hands-on experience. So, they're visiting a university, they're learning new things, and not only about, different subjects, but, things that might pique their interest. We were very fortunate enough to have an astronaut come visit last year. If you're familiar with Cyan Proctor, she was the first African-American woman pilot for SpaceX. So, I've got a unique experience, and every experience is, keeps building on those prior experiences. So I make sure I take advantage, every workshop, every professional development that's offered. It's been amazing. And now working in higher education, working with graduate students, they're able to, learn from those experiences, pique their curiosity and interest and say, hey, this might be something I want to go into. They're looking at different data points. They're looking at R, they're looking at Python, they're doing all this different prolific coding. So, it definitely, piques our understanding and, brings new ideas to what we're doing overall. So it's definitely, I'm excited to share more and looking forward to sharing it tonight.
Oh yeah, and I see again some similarities between Sally also, especially now. You both are dealing with probably more professional, learned people as opposed to maybe where you began your career, David. And I'm going to really pick your brain about the differences between traditional teaching and the similarities and differences between that and your role now, which of course is teaching just the same. I think we'll all find that doing your job, and if you have any amount of expertise, that somehow teaching will come into it because others want to know what you know. And if you're excited about it, which I hope you are, you want to talk about it. So I appreciate your introduction to David, and I'm going to hand it over to Tony. And Tony, I'd like to hear your story as well. Again, what's your background? Let us know. And how did you get into education itself? Maybe what it looks like a little bit for you.
Yeah, so I am Tony Staubach. I'm the food waste diversion specialist for Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati, Ohio. So my role is no longer in education full-time, though I still teach on the side. My current role is really consumer education campaigns and developing infrastructure around food waste reduction. So data and education are everything I do. I just no longer work in education. It's just kind of a different world. So I developed and run our what's called Wasted Food Stops With Us campaign. It is the model campaign that the EPA is using to roll out a lot of their food waste reduction efforts. I work very closely with the EPA and the USDA and the FDA on their national efforts to reduce food waste. Recently, my partners with the EPA came out with the new food waste scale. And so the work that we're doing in Hamilton County definitely influenced development of that scale, as we are one of the highest diverting counties in the country. And we are easily the highest diverting county in Ohio. So we work really closely with our municipal partners in Cincinnati, but we are now working much more closely with our regional planning organization, which is called OKI. Cincinnati sits at the corner of Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. So our regional planner is called OKI, which is great. So we're starting to work with them on more of a regional approach to reducing food waste. So not to spend all the time talking about my current job, which I could do because I love it and it's fun, and I'm in the middle of writing grants, and so it's all I'm doing these days. Prior to my role with Hamilton County, I worked for OSU Extension for 8 years. 4 of those years, I was the 4-H extension educator in Hamilton County. In 4 of those years, I ran and piloted a legislative initiative with Cincinnati Public Schools, Cleveland Metro Schools, OSU, Central State when they came online as a land grant institution, and Wilmington College, of which I'm an alum, which is also Sally, founded by the Religious Society of Friends, or the Quakers, like Swarthmore. And so I worked there for 8 years, and I worked on developing career tech pathways from agriculture education, from the elementary into the high school age, and then into the college realm. So I worked across the K through 12 or K through 16 system to prepare youth to work in agriculture in the variety of jobs that exist today. So everything from, on-farm to marketing to food systems management to food scrap processing to setting up commercial kitchens, all the things. And I fell into that work by accident. I had been a student at Wilmington College years ago and got my degree in education. And I took an AmeriCorps position because it was 2007 and there were no jobs. And I needed health insurance. And so I was like, I'll do AmeriCorps. It's great. I want to get back to my country. That sounds wonderful. So I did that program for a couple of years, and I was running college access programs when the largest employer in the region left about 48% of the 5-county region without jobs. So we worked together to create an agricultural redevelopment program where we retrained people to go back on the farms to do the work that they had been doing historically. And that was great. I wrote a grant. We got $1 million. And then I left and went to grad school and went to Drexel in Philadelphia, Sally. Nice connection going on there. And I got my master's in public policy with a concentration in environmental sciences. So focused very heavily on, social science data. I ended up coming back to Wilmington College to close out the grant that I had written 4 years before, which was an incredibly valuable learning experience, which led me to my work at OSU. But kind of like David, I was born of teachers. It was just kind of the path that was laid in front of me. It was like, oh, no matter what you want to do, having an education degree is going to be key because it's a guaranteed job somewhere. You might not make a ton of money, but like even in the worst of times, you know that you have a skill that is transferable, that is marketable, and that is credentialed. And so my mom was like, if you want to be an actor on stage, you should be a theater instructor. If you want to be, a politician, you should be a social studies teacher. If you want to be a writer, you need to be an English teacher. She was just really big about having that credential because you can get all these other skills, but it's nice to have that credential. So you can go in a room and say, I have this skill set. And it just opens up a lot of doors. And in fact, I have multiple friends who majored in a thing and didn't do the education route with their specialization, and later in life had to go back to get those education programs because they had kids, life was more chaotic, they needed to settle down, and that education degree came in really handy. Now my life has never been like that, so I've not really had to rely on it, but a lot of people wind up in that position where having that credential really does mean something. My mother is also born of a teacher. Her mom was a teacher and one of the early extension educators in the University of Kentucky system. So it was very unusual that I wound up doing almost exactly what she did with my life, except I don't have 7 children and, didn't run far away from my family. So it's great. Yes, I have a very unique pathway to what I do, but like I said, today, everything I do is education. I was on a webinar today teaching a bunch of kids at UC about our composting laws in Ohio and the FDA rule to ensure that compost is safe for food production. So we have a group of students who are working with us to identify food scrap processing facility locations, and they were very confused about all of the laws about compost. And I was like, oh, here's where they come from. Here's why you need them. We don't want any fecal matter on our compost. We got to work on that. So it was a lot of fun to work with them today. And just the other day, I met with a group of concerned citizens about developing a food scrap processing site in their local neighborhood. And then I also was on a conference call with a national group of partners who are planning an awareness week in April around food waste prevention. So every day is something new. Every day is different. Every day is still pretty much teaching, just in a different way.
Yeah, I appreciate that also. Again, that is a really great description. And you and David both have some amount of traditional teaching experience, and actually in similar age ranges. And I wonder, Sally, not having a traditional teaching background, what was it like getting out there and teaching your first? I mean, maybe it wasn't so official that you were going to be teaching your first webinar or your first class or giving your first lecture.
Sure.
But what was that like, and how did you prepare for that? Maybe not having that background.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I luckily got some teaching experience while I was still a PhD student because I think, for a lot of grad school programs, there's some obligation that to pay for you to get your PhD or be here. The thing you do, for as service to your department is teach some certain number of, usually like lab sections if you're a, just starting out PhD student. And I can actually have like pretty visceral memories of that first, week where, I was a, 23-year-old or 23-year-old-ish, like a new PhD student teaching students who were not that much younger than me, right? Because they're undergrads taking their intro biology. And yeah, this visceral memory of just sort of having the most, intense, basically imposter syndrome, that even though at that point I already had my undergrad degree and was certainly subject qualified to, teach them the sort of idea that, why would anybody really listen to me at this certain point in my career? And that, of course, resulted in me probably like vastly over preparing, pretty much like memorizing the lecture type little lab introductions that I was supposed to, give. And I think, definitely, I would say, over prepared, and, realized shortly through that semester that a lot of, especially with that sort of age range and sort of being close to being their peer, and maybe this is some people's like first time in a real biology lab, that it's like I could always, go and look up that fact that I was supposed to have memorized about mitochondria, but it was more about sort of meeting them where they are and making that first experience with biology more sort of approachable, like all the knobs on the microscope and pipetting things, right? That's not something necessarily every high schooler or many high schoolers learn. So I think just realizing that it's like, oh, it's okay. I'm here to guide them. I don't need to know every single answer. And I think, that has sort of served me well to have had that experience of being a little too intimidated, but then sort of easing into it and realizing sort of what relationship I should have, with these students in a way that's most useful for me, my stress levels, and, for them getting something out of it. Yeah, great question.
Right.
Thank you.
And David, I mean, you talked about having a traditional background at first. And I mean, it wasn't just a year or two. You were there for a while. But what was it like when you transitioned into a less formal setting of teaching, after that? I mean, of course, I heard you say it kind of dovetailed into your NASA experience that you had when you were teaching middle school, but those are still wildly different audiences and wildly different arenas. How did you prepare for that? And or did you feel like you already had a lot of the tools and you were just only, tweaking them? What was that like?
Well, I tell you, I felt like I had a lot of the tools because, I served as a formal classroom educator, structured class, teaching middle and elementary school. But I also served in kind of an informal and out of classroom capacity as well. I worked in after school programs, I worked with museum-based programs, lots of, outreach in the community for STEM and computer science programs. When I went to the NASA Office of STEM Engagement, I was very fortunate. It's almost like they knew my education background, and they paired me specifically with the informal learning network. And within that network, they worked with museums, they worked with summer camps, they worked, programs during the summer with colleges and universities. And all of that experience that I had in the classroom transferred over to informal learning. In many aspects, it was very, very similar. In some aspects, it was different. We had, more leniency to do activities. We were more free to do different activities. We could kind of go outside of the scope of what we were learning and doing. So in essence, the formal learning and formal teaching reinforced the informal capacity that I eventually moved on to, and what I'm heavily involved in now currently with the university as well. So I always say every experience leads to something that's going to be worthwhile and new. And in this case, it greatly did.
Yeah, and I was just talking about when I said like a different type of audience. And I kind of want to get this from Tony as well. So Tony, chime in any moment there. You guys don't, people aren't maybe coming to you now that are, I don't know, classroom prepared. Tony, you do a lot with just the general public. And, when you're a kid or I would even say an undergraduate, you kind of still think of as adults of what you may be as an adult someday. But all ranges of motivation, backgrounds, education levels are adults. And when you don't even have to deal with somebody, you know, in the public, you've got this gamut of possible PhD expert to, you know, a person who didn't graduate high school, but is still an important person that, you know, that it's affected in the community by what you do. And I'm going to let David also respond, but I guess, Tony, I'll start with you, and David, think about that as well. Like, you know, how do you deal with these very new audiences with such variation in their backgrounds?
So I would say that so like Sally, the first time I taught in a traditional classroom, I was 22 years old, and it's easy to be intimidated. And what was shocking in that room, because I was teaching in a rural community, was the diversity of thought and the diversity in the abilities of the students. There was one student in this room who was far superior to everybody else in what she knew, how she analyzed situations. Developmentally, she was light years ahead of her peers, and it showed socially. So, you know, there were a lot of conversations with her about that were more in depth. She was seeking more experience in that conversation than what you could provide in a classroom and what was provided to you in the pacing guide by the district. And so it was a lot more one-on-one time with her in that very traditional setting. In a non-traditional setting, like the job I have now, we really try to distill our message down to the core points. And so I have a wonderful supervisor who has taught me, she's written several books on composting. And so it's really great. She's like, oh no, we need to strip this down to the basic elements and let people build on top of this. So with our food waste prevention campaign, we have stripped it down to the 4 S's. We are shopping, serving, sharing, and saving. So like that is, or shopping, serving, storing, sharing, sorry. And so that's what we're doing. We are stripping it down to the 4 S's, and we build around those. Each skill set can be built out. So I have a colleague of mine who goes out and does educational programming in K through 12 schools in very formal and informal settings. And we focus really heavily on that shopping skill because there's wonderful connections to economics, to life skills, to saving money. So like we really build out, like we're like, okay, you're 5, 6 years old. Let's talk about this shopping piece. And then with the storage piece with little kids, we're talking about like recognizing these fruits and vegetables. Like, let's look at what we got. But as we move up into higher level thinking, we start to look at the audiences and say, like, what is the breadth of their knowledge? What are they likely to know? We develop our programs. You know, I hate to do this, but the reality is that census tracts and zip codes tell a lot about our identity. They talk a lot about how long we will live, about our lifestyles. And so I was just on the EPA's EJ tool today as I'm writing a grant, pulling out census tract information. And when I go out to communities to do programs, I am hyper aware of what the community looks like. I often come in with a basic lesson plan, but I also begin that lesson with a, like, let's kind of gauge where we are. And I've got 15 million things I could do, but let's find out where we are. And I will pick out the 1 or 2 things that we can cover in 30 to 45 minutes with question time afterward. So you kind of like figure out your audience. Data is going to be your best friend when you're just out cold giving presentations. Like I said, the other day, a community called me like, we want to start a food scrap drop off. And I was like, well, let's go talk about food waste first, because there's stuff you can do. And they're a rather affluent community. And when I got there, it showed. You know, these were corporate executives. They wanted the quick responses. They wanted high level data. They just wanted you to tell them why it was like this. And then another community that has already established a food scrap drop off, their residents don't understand why. They don't understand why that's a useful tool. They don't understand how to use this. They don't understand that they need to sort waste. They don't understand how anything is managed beyond what they're managing in their own lives. They are parents. They are single parents. They are working 2 jobs. They don't have time for all of this information. So, you know, in that particular case, it's a lot of infographics, a lot of high level, exciting, you know, information, a lot of getting hyped up about like, oh, let's pull that banana peel out of the trash. Let's make something. And often in those situations, I hire a chef who comes out with me and we upcycle food. So just yesterday, we made apple fritters at a food distribution event for about 3,000 people who were there to get free food at a pantry, because we're like, well, there's apples. They need to know how to do something with these apples. Let's give them a skill. Let's give them a talent. Let's get them excited.
So obviously, maybe distilling and keeping it simple. Do you find that too, David, or do you have a different type of audience, and that's a different type of technique?
Yeah, I say keep it simple, because a lot of times, I'm teaching, computer science, we're teaching, STEM to these students. And a lot of times, you're upcycling as well. You're bringing in new items, you're creating, the basis of, STEM is making and creating. So, why not, pique the curiosity of the students and understanding by, bringing in all facets of understanding and learning, I always say, everyone brings a different skill to the table. Let's play to those skills, and bring those to the table so we can all learn from each other and, we can create together. So, definitely good points from Tony, and definitely adding to those.
Sally, we've been talking about the different types of audiences.
Sure.
I wonder, what could you have told your younger self to maybe say, hey, Sally, a long time ago, what would have been good prep for what you're doing now? And I think our students that are in our clubs and organizations that watch these, I mean, that's one of the things they think about is, if I want to be able to teach, but I don't want to maybe do this a traditional path. And yeah, I could get an education degree, but maybe I'm already a little too far to start doing that. What can they do to
Maybe not. It
prepare?
sounds pretty tempting now that
Maybe
Tony and
not.
David have both talked about their jobs.
Right. But what, maybe they're looking at your footsteps and they're thinking, how do I follow that? I still get to use the science, I still get to use the data, I still want to share it with people. Like, what do they do to prepare to do that? That's maybe not taking an actual education course, though.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I guess, if you're here, you're listening, maybe you already know that you want to do something sort of education and outreach. But one piece of advice that I do often give, especially people who are still in grad school and have like slightly more flexible schedules and are, maybe in a college environment, that it's like, you don't have to know yet exactly what you want to do, even though you're, pursuing this degree. I always advise that, take opportunities to try new skill sets and try flexing, new muscles. I mean, some of it, again, was required that I had to teach some number of classes, but a lot of it was also just, the undergrad biology club would occasionally be like looking for a grad student speaker to help talk about a paper. Or we actually formed a partnership with a local Girl Scout troop in the Kansas City metropolitan area, actually sort of a bunch of troops, that whole group of them, to help design a sort of badging program for one of their like water badges, where I got to talk about my marine biology background and show them some specimens from the museum. But all that is to say that evolved from, just some, I think, mother who ran a Girl Scout event was looking for one of us to just go and show a couple of specimens and like talk what it was like to be a biologist, for 10 minutes at a particular, meetup. And so I just started occasionally, schedule permitting, saying yes to these things that were not sort of traditional academic things. And eventually they do sort of end up building on one another. When I was looking for other roles that were more education focused, that it was sort of a selling point, that it's like, I've had, expertise communicating with Girl Scouts or communicating with, stakeholders for the department, or communicating with all of these things. And it could have very well been that I tried some other extracurricular thing, enjoyed that as much as doing outreach either. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to try something you think you're a little intimidated by, or might not like, because you really might enjoy it. And then from then on, it was sort of a sort of deliberate choice for myself that, not having that, traditional, having gone to ed school background, which probably would have been awesome and taught me some best practices. But a lot of it really was just really spending time giving myself the opportunities to teach. It wasn't like a required part of my postdoc, but the NIH has an associated institute called the Foundation for the Advancement of Education in the Sciences. And they, again, teach sort of bioinformatics courses that are mostly for adult learners. And I sort of, got offered, or they were looking for an instructor to help them pivot their bioinformatics course to being longer, and for, of course, the during heart of the pandemic COVID environment. And, I had never worked with some of that content management software and stuff. Well, it's like, well, okay, I'll learn. I have the subject matter expertise. And indeed, I did learn on the job. So a lot of it was sort of very deliberately, once I knew I liked sort of education and outreach at all, making time for those opportunities and sort of jumping on them to build up that resume bit by bit. Yeah.
That makes complete sense. Putting yourself in situations where you
Basically,
kind of dip your toe in,
Yes.
and give yourself a chance to fail too, because
Exactly. I was like, maybe I would not have enjoyed that actually, but then at least I knew, right? So,
right.
yep.
Yeah. And how much of what you do is like in person or virtual, or are they hybrid? What is the way that you communicate with people?
So as I alluded to, and I'll keep it short to make sure that Tony and David have time to comment on that as well, since I bet we all have experiences over the past few years with both. I mean, throughout my postdoc and the first year of this job so far, I started last September, has mostly been virtual as we sort of transitioned into sort of a like understanding, again, those audiences are the audiences that we're now reaching broadly through these virtual events. Are they going to transition to being in person again? Who do we miss out on by making, it in person on campus only at these conferences? And is that sort of outweighed, or how is there going to be a balance between that and like the obvious benefits sometimes of teaching something like bioinformatics in person where you can help them troubleshoot? And so we are just now on the cusp of, taking some of our virtual workshops and thinking about like the best practices for like, would this work in person at a conference, and dipping our toe back into that. So at this job, at least, it has been pretty much mostly virtual, which I'm sure we could have a whole other panel on the like pitfalls and good things about that format. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Well, Tony, is yours mostly in person, or is there a virtual component to it at all when you teach? I mean, because it seems like being in the community might be a more hands-on experience, but let me know, what's that look like?
So it's interesting. I was reflecting on what Sally was talking about when like the pandemic hit and we had to go full on virtual. So I was in the middle of teaching an in-person class that had never moved online. So on the side, I teach for a couple different universities. Right now, I'm teaching a class in global issues for Wilmington College. And when the pandemic hit, that class had not been taught online in any format. And so having to pivot to online was fine because I had spent 8 years with OSU and I was used to doing distance learning and communicating with people across the state and the country who are, working in agriculture in a variety of areas. So that was a really important skill set to have as we transitioned to online instruction, because nobody else had that experience at these small, like local communities. So just today I was reflecting on the fact that like I'm pushing 40 and it's like when my parents had to get on the internet for the first time, people are talking about things, doing things online. AI for me is like when my parents got on AOL. It's going to be a very difficult transition for me. I'm starting to learn to use it now. I used it to write a thank you letter yesterday. I'm like, okay, low level engagement with this technology. But in my work, there is a huge component that is in person, but there's a bigger component that's online. So although my work is focused on a local government and focused on a local community, most of my time is spent being a part of these national efforts and international efforts to address food waste, which is, according to multiple sources, the best thing we can do to reduce carbon emissions is to reduce our food waste. The primary, secondary, and tertiary emissions from food is crazy. So we were talking about scope 3 analysis just today for the CPRG grant that we're working on, the climate pollution reduction grant. So the other half of the office I work for is the Southwest Ohio Air Quality Agency. Hamilton County oversees that effort in our region because we're a non-attainment region. So a big part of my job is connecting the work we do to the outcome for carbon emission reduction. I'm trying to think of the right words here. So a lot of my work is online, but then there's a huge part of my work that is asynchronous. So I don't get to see the people I'm teaching anymore. And that has been a really big challenge. Right now I'm working on an EPA grant, and that's how we're writing it, is to expand our asynchronous education outreach program. So again, we've distilled our message down to a few key points. I'm working with a marketing company right now to create those digital assets to get into the community. But everything I do is from an education perspective, and that's why I was hired for this job, is for every asset that our marketing company works with me to create, there are goals and objectives, and it has to be a measurable output. So if we put on a message that you need to make a shopping list, I need to know how people are making a shopping list. So are we directing them to a particular asset like an app? Are we directing them to a resource that's on our Wasted Food website? If we're asking them to store food, are we giving specific foods? And how are we collecting that information? So it's a plethora of things that I deal with, and online is real, but indirect education is a huge part of teaching.
Yes, yeah, there's a whole other skill set that you've had to learn. And, if this was a year ago, David, if this was a year ago and we said, oh, what's new in education? You might talk about some sort of web-based module to direct a course, whether, if you're in, Google Classroom has its big thing, but every university has their own versions of online web-based portals. And we might talk about YouTube or podcasts or the social media. But, the skills of today for any teacher, I just heard Tony say it, and it's your world, and that's AI. I mean, how is AI affecting education? How is it affecting what you're doing? I feel like maybe you would be on the cusp of what's there, and then maybe how to use it.
There's a big push for generative AI in education. How are we using it? What are the benefits? What are the pitfalls? How can we make sure we use it in a way that's safe to use, but ethical as well? Our university recently received an expanding AI planning grant through the National Science Foundation, and that enables us to have a AI Institute at the university. It was a recent NSS Sales Summit that showcased the different AI institutes, and everything from AI in agriculture, to AI in healthcare, data science. All of this was being pieced together. Looking at these different components of AI. I always ask myself, how can we not only push the envelope for proprietary inventions, but how can we use it to increase student learning, to maximize our teaching loads, to make it more efficient for all of our educational institutions and partners. So as AI continues to evolve, those are the questions that we're grasping every day. And I'm learning as much as I can. We're trying to integrate it within Blackboard and our different classes and our different learning modalities. But it's definitely something to consider as we continue to advance in education.
Sally, do you use AI in any of your teaching or maybe even any of your research? And, I think when it comes down to either, I think the one thing that people worry about right now is how much can you trust it? It's a great time saver if you're going to be writing a thank you letter. It's,
Totally.
An eloquent thank you letter is great. But when you're dealing with actual data and science itself, which is kind of the search for truth in many ways, how do we verify this? How do we use this in our education and in your research in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say that as far as like generating educational materials and the workshops that are like on the schedule right now, we have yet to dive in to that. But I will say that is something that like the NIH, NCBI, NLM as a whole are very interested in, right? Because one of our main jobs as a whole institute is to store a bunch of data that could be very useful for, training various, learning models and AI and stuff. And so this spring, myself and the other co-lead of our education program, Alexa, who runs sort of the more experiential, longer term learning things like codathons, she is actually the one leading a sort of ML, like an ML AI for sort of ethical research, especially in bioinformatics and biomedical sciences. So I can send that info out. Would love it if some of you joined and if you distributed that. We're always looking for good participants. But it is something we're certainly aware of. And I know that a lot of thought sort of at the institutional level is being put into how can we make sure that this data is sort of, being scraped in ways that doesn't, damage the security of our systems, is done, ethically and also done reliably. And we've have in fact seen instances, from some of the product teams at NCBI where somebody will write in one of the other big things that the customer engagement broader team does as a whole is, get a bunch of user questions about all of our databases. And we've started getting some that are like, oh, I used ChatGPT or one of the other services to like ask a question about this gene and it returned this thing. But then when I actually go and look at your website, it says something different. And, sort of gently trying to figure out where that information came from and establishing that, we actually put a lot of work into curating and verifying our connections to data, so that maybe you should, rely on us as this like vetted database. So that is starting to touch upon our work. And so we're slowly starting to incorporate it, into our education. But I have to tell you that we are very interested in using it in sort of a maybe thank you note level thing for doing things like parsing through and summarizing, the thousands of student comments we get about our workshops to see, sort of sentiment analysis, like, are there broad topics of workshops that people are sort of always asking for us to teach in the future? And I bet one of the very meta answers will be that I think a lot of people seem to want to have, AI and ML in biology workshops. So we shall see. But yeah, we're just dipping our toe in there, but very aware of it given our sort of status as a place where you get data.
And it really brings into that, AI is we're in the infancy of it being rolled out to the public. I mean, I'm sure it's been around for a while, not to maybe the degree and depth that it can work right now. But this isn't a brand new technology either. It's just brand new to a few billion people. and that's exactly when you find out what it can and can't do. And I'm guessing also that there'll be flavors, and I'm hoping that those flavors will look like creativity, maybe even sympathy or empathy if that's what you're looking for, but also fact-driven and hard numbers behind what it does and thinks. And I don't know, David, is that where you guys see this going, or is it just the Wild West right now? And anybody anybody can come to the saloon.
I'm seeing, I'm told to stay within a certain path, for our programs, and projects, but I see a wide variety. I saw AI used in agriculture. I mean, I saw AI used in a variety of ways, this past week at NSS Summit. But, using in a way in a data science and a biomedical data science pathway is key for what we're doing right now. Not only using it responsibly, but designing it in a way that's, understandable for our students to understand. So, when they're programming, or they're researching, they can get a better idea of, the components that make up the AI system, the generative AI component or the aspect of what they're learning. So, learning about it from a controlled aspect, I think is best for now, even though it seems to be all over the place.
Yeah. And I wondered, Tony, how much longer is it going to be where the general public is going to come to you with using this AI to inform them? I mean, we've had this problem with, we know it's a problem of misinformation. And we have like maybe a new layer of problem with misinformation if it's AI. And that's not people nefariously getting news that have a reason to deceive you, which if you're dealing with climate science like you are already, that's you're already up to your neck. But people using it with the intent of trying to learn and maybe not getting actual good information because there were some hallucinations in the AI. I don't know if you're seeing it yet, but I think it also leads just to misinformation in general, and how, as a teacher, how do you deal with getting misinformation and doing it in a way that's not a combative thing, but an actual learning experience?
So I went to South by Southwest Educator Conference years ago, and it was by far the most beneficial conference because one thing was said. And I've thought about information literacy through my entire career. And the woman on the stage, I don't remember who she was. I think she worked for the Moth, like the Moth Radio Hour, which also is a fascinating podcast. She said something to the extent of evaluating sources is about knowing your author's intent. And I was like, that's it. All the studies I've done, trying to understand everything I've tried to figure out about how to evaluate a source, who wrote it and what did they mean, Like that's what it gets distilled down to. So like knowing the author is key, but AI makes that really hard. Just today, I was trying to look up some information, and we all start with a Google search or a Bing search, whatever branded search you want to call. You get on there, you Google a thing, and you're like, okay, like I want to look up an agency that does something. Thousands of choices come up. And I'm like, how am I supposed to evaluate this? What is the repository? What's the source that's going to say this is okay? And what I was looking up was like a human resource related or a human resource related thing. And I was like, let me just go on Ohio's Job and Family Services website and see which of these agencies is also listed on there. And so you get on there and they have a search tool and you select your county and you go through the search tool. And I'm like, pretty soon AI will take care of this for me. Like pretty soon I will search something on like some general AI database and I'll be like, great. And I'll go to like some other site and I'll learn how to write this the right way. And I will ask it like, of the agencies that showed up on this list, which ones of them do you also have? Like there'll be some way to cross-reference. There'll be something that happens where I can like look up this information in a cleaner and an easier way. We, every 5 years in our office, have to write a report on the capacity of the region to handle waste. I mean, this is an 800-page document we write every 5 years. It's the focus of a lot of our work. I can't wait for AI to read this thing to me. Like we break it up. There's 8 of us in our office. We each basically write 100 pages of this document. I cannot wait till I can be like, hey, how much of this is in here? Like, where is this? Like, can you just keyword search this for me? Like better than that. I cannot wait for it to be able to do that. And for the community to be able to access that resource. We already saw that transition in our office years ago. When the internet became a thing and all of a sudden you could add a search tool to a website and people could go on there and be like, how do I get rid of mattresses? Because we are a solid waste management district and people often call like, how do I get rid of latex paint? Just put it in the search tool. It'll tell you. You don't need to talk and speak to a secretary or somebody with an advanced degree to tell you how to get rid of latex paint. Like that's a pretty easy one. That we can put that on a website. You can search it. It's easy. I think AI at the granular level will probably have a lot to do with how people access that information. But like Sally was saying, her role nationally in the biomedical research field, feeding the beast. We're all going to be responsible for feeding this beast and figuring out how to get the information to people. And there will be checks and balances that will come out. There will be reputable sites and there will be ones that you use for general information, and there will be like Wikipedia, and there'll be others that you use for like, EBSCO host level, like, like academic search complete research that you would do in college. There will be tiers that will develop. We will figure this out. It's going to happen.
Sally, do you even deal with much misinformation? Do people come with you to you with misinformation, or is that not really a part of where your angle is? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, so yeah, I can't really speak on anything like sort of policy or political level, in my current role or on behalf of that. I would say mostly sort of what I deal with is not misinformation so much as, like I mentioned, people sort of using something like one of the AI tools and coming up with an answer that doesn't match with what's in our database, or somebody, coming to one of our workshops with often like a preconceived notion about some biological concept or something about, what you can't and can't actually learn from a particular database. So luckily, I guess for me, a lot of the role is a sort of not too far akin to sort of normal sort of biology education, which is sort of correcting, actual, misunderstandings about the content itself, luckily, and not so much, I would say, deliberate misinformation. Is definitely interesting, and I won't get into it here. Teaching evolution in Kansas and in the Midwest, there was definitely a little bit more sort of not necessarily conflict, but again, thinking about just the diversity of my students' life experiences, up to that point in their education. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Not a lot of deliberate misinformation for my job, but maybe that's more of a question for some of my colleagues who are involved in, talking about the importance of getting vaccinated and the public health educators that work alongside it.
Very much so. I can see that.
Yeah. Not for me.
You know, we're getting kind of close to where we're going to be wrapping up soon, but we still have plenty of time. If anybody in the audience would like to ask a question, I haven't seen any in the chat. Of course, you're always allowed to bring up a question in the chat. I would love for you to ask a question, and I'm sure our co-host would too. Alexandra, would you like to unmute and let me know?
Yeah, of course. I have a question, if possible, to ask. So I have a question to my guest today. I was thinking about creating my YouTube channel, which will be about math and computer science. I know a lot of students struggle in calculus classes and math classes and computer science classes. Do you think that would be a great idea to improve like the field of education? Since I know that you know like all the circumstances and details of that. Or do you think that there's like alternative way that I can take to improve that and help students to, feel better in those classes?
All right, gang, what do you guys think? We have, she's wanting to put out, you say like, Alexandra, like YouTube, is that the medium you want to use or some other medium?
Yeah, it's going to be a YouTube channel, which is going to be the platform for learning. And I'm just thinking whether it's going to be a great idea to improve the educational field and help students to feel better in those hard classes. Just trying the question to our guests.
Anybody like to speak up and give me your thoughts?
I would say yes. Social media is a vital part of teaching and learning. When I was a classroom teacher, I prolifically use social media for learning for the students. And if there were things that I didn't quite understand, we posted videos about it. We interacted with federal agencies. We interacted with vendors. We had scientists reaching out to us. So, and that better, helped us understand different concepts. So I definitely recommend, having that YouTube channel, making videos, making it fun, making it interactive, and don't limit yourself to YouTube. There's Instagram, there's Threads, expand your reach. The more that you're sharing what you're doing, the bigger chance you're going to have to interact with a variety of professionals in the field that are not only going to help you through whatever you're learning, but they're going to take you to that next step or that next stage.
Yeah, and I just want to jump on that even as a professional educator and even somebody who is preparing lectures in an academic setting, I do recognize, and especially now that I feel like our attention spans are a little, frazzled, that, oftentimes to really learn something, you need to be taught it by several different people, maybe in several different ways. And I feel like even for a lecture course, sometimes I would go back and see how, expert on YouTube explained the thing that maybe I was going to explain or the thing that I was responsible for learning. So I think it's sort of great to add to that collective body of people explaining complicated things really well out there somewhere. So I definitely, although I don't do it as much in this role now, have benefited greatly from great explainers out there on social media and YouTube, for example.
I just want to read a quick comment I think is really relevant. One of our guests says, a suggestion, maybe creating a YouTube channel to teach how to use AI or ChatGPT to solve the problems. What's it look like to even use that to solve problems? Maybe not just, bam, put a problem in and maybe it spits out an answer, maybe it doesn't, but teaching the future students how to use it to teach themselves. I think that's a great piece of advice. We have another question here too. I'm gonna ask for it. It says, what advice would you offer a graduate student eager to share research to the community outside publishing in journals? I don't have a ready audience, so I don't know what to do with my research to appeal to people, but talking about issues in climate change and sustainability.
So, and this kind of also goes to Alexandra's comment or question, but people's and Sally's comment that attention spans are really short. So if you do want to create a video, having a long form video is great, but you have to also create your 15-second short form video that draws people in and gets them excited. And if you've got a bunch of data on climate change and you're doing research, like short form blogs that you are reading to people are really attractive. And you can put those in a variety of places. So with our Wasted Food Stops List campaign, I wrote blogs for like a year because I was like, we just need content on this website. I got to quote unquote feed the beast. And then I'm like, nobody's reading these anymore because nobody has 2 minutes to read. Let me read them to you. So I started recording all of the blogs to read to people. And that's what I send out as the audio file. And that's what we've started putting in other places. It's like people are not reading. If they want to get ready information, they want 15 seconds, 2 minutes at most. You know, they want the information spoon fed to them because they're in the car, they're on the go, they're taking a walk. It's insane. It's ridiculous. I read every day, but like a lot of people are not. And so if you're trying to get information to the masses, trying to get them new information, write it. It's always best to write it, have a written version that someone can keyword search, but read it to them, record it. It's awesome. It's a really good tool and it's a really good skill for you to develop.
Yeah.
So maybe a blog with an audio section. I like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I was actually just going to say, like, on the flip side of the in-person thing, although I'm not sure how well this would work now, but it's getting back out there. I'm not sure, necessarily where you're a graduate student, but there were often just sort of looking at like literally community like newspapers or things sent to our department or even following community groups on Facebook. You'll find that there are often more opportunities than you'd think to sort of have somebody talk about something interesting, like their research, like at a local library. Or once I participated in like an informal lecture series that literally was, I think, at like a Denny's in Topeka in Kansas, or, talking to the Girl Scouts. So I wouldn't necessarily sell yourself short. There probably are some good informal ed opportunities, out there for different audiences in your community. It just takes a little bit of legwork to find them sometimes.
I'm going to add too, tomorrow is Climate Action Day.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Sponsored by the United Nations, and I just dropped it in there. I'm actually involved in that, so they're expecting a very large turnout. So definitely check out Climate Action Day. They've got astronauts coming. They've got a variety of individuals that are participating in that. So you might meet some worthwhile connections that will help you expand your reach.
And is that every year about this same time in November, David? Yes,
it is. I think they've got, I'm just looking at a blurb, they've just got Tony Hawk as a speaker. So they've got 10 different speakers this year. So just a few, I'm just kind of rattling off some names. So it's about the same time every year, and it's sponsored by the United Nations. It's part of the SDGs, the global goals. So definitely recommend checking it out.
That sounds incredibly interesting. And I do wonder what Tony Hawk knows about climate change. And that would be interesting to find out. But it's great to have ambassadors like him that have name recognition and bring audiences in. That is awesome. Well, guys, we have done a pretty good job here. We've used our hour. We've gone a little bit over. We've had some really great conversations. If we have just a couple minutes left, if anyone else has a quick question, I wouldn't mind that being out there. But otherwise, we also wouldn't mind wrapping up with our time that we have.
I got a couple of quick things that maybe we can run through. So Sally, a lot of the students in our network, whether they're undergrad or grad students, have a lot of technical experience with working with data, working with data analytics kinds of tools, but they may not have any teaching experience. But they may end up in roles where they're having to teach some of those technical skills to other people in their organization or to other kinds of audiences. And so, I'm wondering, with your background, what would you say is the kind of development that they would need to learn to take that technical skill that they have, but be able to translate it into a teaching kind of opportunity? What was different about that for you when you had to make that transition?
Sure. Some of it was, again, just sort of reaching out and finding those experiences where I could get real, like on the ground, like literally practice explaining the complicated things I do to a variety of audiences. So sort of, yeah, like what necessarily caught me off guard is not necessarily like an underestimation for my audiences, but more so just an appreciation for, again, the amount of information a person can digest at once. How many sub bullet points, like can we actually get through in an hour with everybody, still being on board? Is it feasible to demo all of these things at once, or should we just stick to the bases? So those were definitely sort of pedagogy, best practices, things that I did sort of have to learn on the fly. And so I would say it's a lot about, jumping on some of those opportunities. Even within sort of a more data science role, there are probably good opportunities to explain things to, perhaps your new colleague, or to give a presentation at a meeting, things that let you practice some of those things, as well as sort of, I would say, get some mentorship, or, shadow people in your department who have sort of seem really good at presenting and explaining things. And I would also just like to give a quick shout out to an organization called the Carpentries, that does data science training and training of the trainers, all for free. It's a nonprofit, so they have really good curriculum materials. And I think a few times a year still do instructor training. I did that as part of my sort of just piecemeal data science education training, and they were awesome. So I think formally that, but also just informally, follow along with people who you think are really good at communicating, get some mentorship from them, and sort of pick up on opportunities to do so. Because there's a lot of things you do in your daily life, again, like explaining something to a colleague, that kind of is teaching, and uses those skills at conveying complicated information, even if it doesn't feel like classroom teaching.
Thank you, Sally. And I want to second the Carpentries, the Midwest Big Data Hub. We are involved with them quite a bit as well, and always been impressed by what they do and their motivations behind what they do. A very good place to start, the Carpentries. All right. Well, again, I appreciate everybody being here. I had a great conversation, and I just want to wrap up by thanking you all so much for taking, time. For every hour that we're on here, it takes more time to prepare and to carve out from your busy schedules. And you guys have busy schedules. You have a lot going on in your life, and everybody here appreciates giving up that time so we can learn from you. And I will see you all next time.
Thank you. And it was so great to hear about your super amazing and interesting sounding jobs, David and Tony. That's awesome. Great to meet you both.
Likewise. Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to be connected on LinkedIn now.
Likewise. Yeah.
Yes,
I think you already found me, Tony, but David, I'll find you too, and all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everyone else, feel free to add me. Happy to talk about my job.
Well, I love following all of you and seeing what you're doing. And I have quite a few people I am connected to. But again, you guys kind of rose to the top. You have very interesting backgrounds. You have very interesting things you're studying. You just don't let anything stay. You just don't let the dust settle. That's what I've noticed. I really am impressed by all that you accomplish and all the sacrifices it takes to be able to accomplish those things.
Well, I appreciate it. Maybe I'll get some time to relax and let the dust settle someday, but sounds kind of good.
The holidays are coming up.
Exactly.
You'll take a couple.
There you go. Go get some turkey.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.